Welcome back to another deep dive into the shadows of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. Tonight, we're exploring something different, something that has kept theorists awake for years, dissecting every pixel, every voice line, every hidden detail scattered across a decade of games, books, and cryptic developer hints. We're talking about the mysteries that remain unsolved, the questions that still echo through empty pizzeria halls, the secrets that Scott Cawthon and Steel Wool Studios have either deliberately obscured or simply left dangling in the dark for us to puzzle over endlessly. Five Nights at Freddy's has always been a franchise built on mystery. From that very first game in 2014, when players sat in a cramped security office fending off possessed animatronics, the lore beneath the surface was already far deeper than anyone initially realized. What seemed like a simple horror game about killer robots quickly revealed itself to be an intricate puzzle box filled with hidden meanings, cryptic minigames, and a timeline so convoluted that even the most dedicated fans still argue about the basic order of events. That's the beauty of this series, really. The horror isn't just in the jump scares or the tension of watching your power drain to zero. It's in the unanswered questions, the lingering doubts, the realization that no matter how much you think you understand, there's always another layer waiting to be uncovered. Over the years, some mysteries have been solved. We know who the purple guy is. We understand the missing children incident. We've pieced together the Afton family tree, though not without considerable debate. But for every answer we've found, 3 more questions have emerged, and some mysteries, some fundamental pieces of the puzzle, have stubbornly refused to yield their secrets despite years of investigation, countless hours of gameplay analysis, and entire communities dedicated to cracking the codes hidden in survival logbooks and minigame sprites. Tonight, we're going to walk through every major unsolved mystery that still haunts the Five Nights at Freddy's universe. We'll examine the evidence, explore the most popular theories, and try to understand why these particular questions have proven so impossible to answer definitively. Some of these mysteries are old, dating back to the original games. Others are newer, emerging from Security Breach and its ruin expansion. But they all share one thing in common. They represent the places where Scott Cawthon's carefully constructed narrative either deliberately leaves gaps for interpretation or becomes so tangled in its own complexity that even he might not remember the original intent. Whether you're here to learn about these mysteries for the first time, letting the details wash over you as you drift towards sleep, or you're a veteran theorist revisiting familiar territory in hopes of catching some detail you might have missed, this journey will take us through the deepest, darkest corners of FNaF lore. We'll talk about phantom animatronics whose origins make no sense, children whose names were never revealed, incidents that contradict each other, and secrets locked away in boxes that may never open. So settle in, get comfortable, and let's explore the questions that keep the FNaF community theorizing, debating, and searching for answers in the quiet hours when the animatronics come alive. The identity of Golden Freddy. Who haunts the yellow bear? We begin with perhaps the most fundamental mystery in the entire Five Nights at Freddy's franchise. A question that has spawned countless theories, bitter arguments between camps of theorists, and a debate that continues to rage even now, 10 years after Golden Freddy first appeared slumped in the corner of the security office. Who exactly possesses Golden Freddy? What spirit or spirits inhabit this ghost-like entity that crashes games, teleports through walls, and seems to operate by rules fundamentally different from every other haunted animatronic in the series? Golden Freddy is unique in nearly every way. Unlike the other animatronics who stalk the halls with mechanical precision, Golden Freddy simply appears. No footsteps, no movement between cameras. One moment your office is empty, the next moment a slumped yellow bear sits before you, head hanging, eyes gone, existing in a state somewhere between physical and spectral. Look at him too long in FNaF 2 and he'll jump scare you. Pull up your monitor fast enough in FNaF 1 and he vanishes like smoke. He doesn't follow the normal rules because he isn't normal, not even by the standards of possessed animatronics. He's something else entirely. The most widely accepted answer to Golden Freddy's identity comes from evidence scattered across multiple games and the survival logbook. According to this evidence, Golden Freddy is possessed by a child named Cassidy, one of the 5 victims of William Afton's missing children incident. The proof for this comes primarily from FNaF 6, Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator, where the completion ending shows 6 gravestones on a hill. 4 names are clearly visible: Gabriel, Jeremy, Susie, and Fritz, corresponding to the spirits possessing Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy. 1 gravestone, belonging to Charlie Emily, sits apart on the hill, and 1 gravestone's name is obscured by grass. This hidden name was meant to be discovered through the survival logbook, a tie-in book filled with security notes, minigame references, and most importantly, hidden codes. By following a series of number-based coordinates through a word search puzzle, players discovered the name Cassidy, spelled out in the grid. The process was intricate, requiring players to connect faded text questions with altered responses, use page numbers as coordinates, and decode the resulting pattern. The name Cassidy appeared alongside multiple references to "It's me," the phrase most strongly associated with Golden Freddy's appearances throughout the series. The connection seemed clear. Cassidy is the 5th missing child, and Cassidy possesses Golden Freddy. But here's where it gets complicated, and why this remains an unsolved mystery despite seemingly concrete evidence. The FNaF community isn't convinced that Cassidy is the only spirit inside Golden Freddy. A significant portion of theorists believe in what's called the Golden Duo theory, the idea that Golden Freddy is actually possessed by 2 souls, Cassidy and the crying child, the young boy who died in the bite of '83. The evidence for Golden Duo comes from several sources. First, there's the strange nature of Golden Freddy himself. In FNaF 3's Happiest Day minigame, when the spirits of the missing children are finally set free, the final child to receive a birthday cake is notably different from the others. This child sits alone, facing away, and their mask appears to be Golden Freddy's. But the scene also seems to reference the crying child, the boy from FNaF 4, whose birthday party ended in tragedy. The overlap is deliberate but maddeningly unclear. Ultimate Custom Night adds more fuel to this fire. When Golden Freddy is set to difficulty 1 and certain conditions are met, players can trigger a secret cutscene known as the Void. In this scene, Golden Freddy twitches in a dark space, while a young boy's face, different from the usual death screens, appears. Text appears from a character called the One You Should Not Have Killed, a phrase that seems to refer to the spirit keeping William Afton trapped in his personal hell. The gender and identity of this spirit is never confirmed, but the fact that Golden Freddy is central to this scene suggests extreme importance to the character. The novels add another layer of confusion. In the original Silver Eyes trilogy, Golden Freddy is possessed by a boy named Michael Brooks. In the Fazbear Fright stories, which Scott Cawthon stated could be used to fill in blanks in the game's lore, a vengeful spirit named Andrew, described as the one you shouldn't have killed, keeps William Afton alive after his death to torture him endlessly. Andrew is explicitly compared to Golden Freddy in these stories. But Andrew is described as a boy with an alligator mask, while Cassidy in the games appears to be, well, that's also unclear. Some depictions suggest Cassidy is female, others lean male. The evidence contradicts itself. Here's what makes this mystery so frustrating. We have a name, Cassidy. We have strong evidence linking that name to Golden Freddy. We have the survival logbook codes, the gravestone, the It's Me connections. By all accounts, this should be solved. But the nature of Golden Freddy, the way he behaves, the dueling evidence from books and games, and the persistent hints at a second spirit or a different identity altogether, means that even with concrete evidence, we can't be completely certain. Some theorists argue that Cassidy is the only spirit, and all the confusion comes from parallel universe storylines that don't directly apply to the games. Others insist that the Crying Child and Cassidy share Golden Freddy, which would explain the entity's unique properties and its special role in both freeing and tormenting souls. A smaller group believes we've been wrong all along, that Golden Freddy isn't even one of the original missing children's animatronics, but rather a separate springlock suit with its own tragic history. The debate extends to basic facts. Is Cassidy male or female? The Fazbear Frights. Andrew's stories, which parallel game events, suggest a male spirit. However, Return to the Pit, another book in the Tales from the Petaplex series, describes the fifth missing child, likely Cassidy based on context, as a girl with curly hair. The face that appears in Ultimate Custom Night special scenes has been interpreted by many as masculine. The Princess Quest games in Security Breach, which some believe may represent Cassidy's story, use feminine imagery. Even something as fundamental as the spirit's gender remains contested, with evidence pointing in multiple directions. And what about the Crying Child's ultimate fate? If he doesn't possess Golden Freddy, where did his soul go? The I will put you back together promise from FNaF 4 seems significant, but we've never gotten a clear answer about what it meant or whether it was fulfilled. If he does share Golden Freddy with Cassidy, how exactly does that work? Do they take turns? Are they both present simultaneously? Did one absorb the other? This mystery matters because Golden Freddy is pivotal to the entire story. This is the spirit, or spirits, that seemingly refuse to rest even after Henry's fire in Pizzeria Simulator. This is the entity keeping William Afton trapped in his nightmare. This is the ghostly presence that appears across games, manifesting in ways that suggest powers beyond normal possession. Understanding who Golden Freddy is, who haunts that empty yellow suit, is fundamental to understanding the emotional core of the entire series. Yet despite a decade of investigation, despite codes and books and hidden minigames and developer hints, we still don't have a definitive answer. We have Cassidy's name, but we don't know if that's the whole story. We have the Crying Child's tragedy, but we don't know his ultimate fate. We have Golden Freddy's power, but we don't fully understand its source. The yellow bear, slumped and eyeless, guards its secrets well, even after all these years. And until Scott Cawthon or Stillwall Studios explicitly confirms the truth in a way that leaves no room for interpretation, the identity of Golden Freddy will remain one of the franchise's most debated and fascinating mysteries. The Locked Box, FNaF 4's greatest secret. At the end of Five Nights at Freddy's 4, after surviving the nightmare animatronics' relentless assaults, after piecing together the tragic story of the Crying Child and the Bite of 83, After thinking you finally reached the conclusion, you're presented with a simple image. A locked box sits on screen, adorned with 2 brass locks, solid and secure. Above it, text appears in the familiar pixelated font. Perhaps some things are best left forgotten for now. Players immediately set to work trying to open it. They clicked the locks, hoping for a hidden button. They scoured the game files for unused sprites, finding an unlocked version of the box that suggested it was meant to be opened at some point. They searched every corner of the game, every minigame, every secret screen, looking for keys or codes or some method to reveal what lay inside. But nothing worked. The box remained stubbornly, infuriatingly closed. And here we are, nearly 10 years later, and that box is still locked. Not because players haven't tried hard enough, not because the solution is too obscure, but because Scott Cawthon, the creator of Five Nights at Freddy's himself, has admitted that he doesn't remember what was supposed to be inside, and he's not sure he'll ever open it. Let's understand the context around this box and why it represents one of gaming's most infamous unsolved mysteries. FNaF 4 was released in July 2015, marketed as the final chapter of the series. Scott had stated that unlike the previous 3 games, whose lore the community had successfully decoded, FNaF 4 contained a story that would be much harder to solve. He filled the game with symbolic imagery, nightmare versions of the animatronics, and minigames that seemed to show different time periods and perspectives. The community worked tirelessly, but nobody could quite piece it all together to Scott's satisfaction. When the box appeared, the message was clear. There was a final piece of the puzzle, a key revelation that would make everything fall into place. But it was locked away. The phrase "for now" suggested it would eventually be opened, perhaps when the community had solved enough of FNaF 4's mysteries to earn the reveal. But that never happened. In a Steam post from October 2015, Scott addressed the box directly, and his statement is worth examining closely because it reveals the fundamental problem. He said that the community hadn't found the pieces to solve FNaF 4's story. He mentioned that most people assumed he'd filled the game with random Easter eggs, but he insisted he hadn't. There was a coherent story, but nobody had discovered it. The box, therefore, remained locked because its opening was contingent on the community solving puzzles they never managed to solve. But here's where things get complicated. Over the years, through various interviews and Reddit posts, Scott has made several revealing statements about the box that fundamentally changed our understanding of it. In an interview with YouTuber Darko in 2024, Scott was asked directly about the box's contents. His response was honest and somewhat melancholy. "There is something in the box, but I never pursued that, and I don't know if I can find it again. I think that's the best answer that I can possibly give for that." Think about what that means. There was something planned. There was an intended revelation. But Scott himself, the creator, can no longer remember what it was, or has decided not to pursue that narrative thread. The story of FNaF evolved so much beyond FNaF 4, expanding into Sister Location, Pizzeria Simulator, Help Wanted, and Security Breach, that whatever the box was supposed to contain became irrelevant or contradictory to later developments. In a previous discussion with Darko about fan theories, Scott confirmed that theorist MatPat was absolutely right in suggesting that the contents of the box had changed over time. Scott explained that the story idea evolved between the conceptualization of FNaF 4 and the community's reaction to it, where he tried to craft it into something better. The box was supposed to contain the key to understanding FNaF 4's original narrative, but that narrative was apparently revised, expanded, or abandoned as the series continued. So what theories have emerged about what might have been, or still could be, inside the box? The most popular theory, particularly before Scott's recent comments, was that the box contained items representing the complete FNaF timeline up to that point. Game theory's MatPat proposed that inside were mementos from each game, physical representations of the entire story that would confirm the timeline and resolve contradictions. This would align with FNaF 4 being marketed as the final chapter. The box would be the definitive answer key. Another theory suggested the box contained the crying child himself, or more specifically, his body or remains. This ties into the interpretation that William Afton, the crying child's father, promised to put him back together, not metaphorically, but literally. The box would be where William kept his son's body, perhaps attempting to rebuild him or preserve him in some way. This theory draws support from the box's appearance in the Charlie novels, where it does indeed contain a body, though those novels exist in a separate continuity. Some theorists believe the box contained evidence of the true identity of the FNaF 4 protagonist, settling the debate between whether we play as the crying child or his brother Michael during the nightmare segments. Others thought it might contain proof of who actually owned Fredbear's family diner, or documentation of the Springlock failures, or some other piece of corporate history that would clarify the timeline. The FNaF movie, released in 2023, introduced its own version of the box. In the film, William Afton has a locked box where he keeps mementos from his victims, trophies from his murders like a traditional serial killer. Some fans have taken this as Scott's official answer to the game's box, a retroactive explanation delivered through a different medium. But the movie exists in its own continuity, so whether this interpretation applies to the games remains uncertain. What makes the box mystery so uniquely frustrating is that it represents a broken promise. For now implies eventually. The unlocked sprite in the game files proves it was meant to be opened. Scott's own statements confirm there was supposed to be something inside. But through a combination of the community failing to solve FNaF 4 as intended, the story evolving beyond its original scope, and the sheer passage of time, the box has transformed from a puzzle waiting to be solved into a symbol of questions that may never have answers. Think about what we know for certain. The box is locked. It has 2 locks, suggesting perhaps 2 keys or 2 revelations needed to open it. It exists in FNaF 4, the game whose story Scott said wasn't solved correctly. The phrase, "some things are best left forgotten," could imply the contents are tragic, dangerous, or simply no longer relevant. And Scott himself, the only person who definitively knows the original intent, has said he's moved on and might not even remember what that intent was. This is the nature of FNaF mysteries at their most existential. Even when we have a concrete object, a clear question, and a creator willing to engage with fans, some things slip away. The story becomes too big. The narrative shifts. What seemed essential at one point becomes vestigial at another. And we're left with an image of a locked box, forever closed. The ultimate unsolved mystery, not because the answer is too complex, but because the answer may have been lost to time and revision. Will the box ever be opened? Scott's comments suggest probably not. At least not in any official capacity. He said the contents have changed in his mind over the years. He's implied the original idea might not fit with current law, He's essentially given permission for the community to decide for themselves what the box contains, to make it whatever they need it to be to complete their understanding of the story. In a way, that's fitting for Five Nights at Freddy's, a series built on mystery, on interpretation, on communities coming together to solve puzzles, ends up with one puzzle that exists in a superposition of all possible solutions. The box contains everything and nothing. It's the crying child's body, and the complete timeline, and Fredbear's blueprints, and Scott's original notes, and whatever else you need it to be to make the story work in your mind. The box is closed, and in being closed, it can be anything. But for those of us who like our mysteries solved, who want definitive answers and confirmed lore, the box remains a source of gentle frustration. It's the one that got away, the question that will never be answered, the secret that's best left forgotten, not because it should be, but because it has been. And every time we finish FNaF 4, we see that box one more time, those two locks gleaming, the promise of revelation eternally deferred. Perhaps some things are best left forgotten, but that doesn't mean we'll ever stop wondering what might have been inside. The shadow animatronics, phantoms without purpose. Among all the possessed animatronics, the murdered children's spirits seeking revenge, and William Afton's various corpse-inhabited suits, there exist two entities that defy easy explanation. They appear across multiple games. They crash your software or black out your screen. They're connected to death and agony but seem to lack the clear origin stories of other characters. We call them Shadow Freddy and Shadow Bonnie, though the latter's official name is the unpronounceable string of letters R, WQFSSFSXE. And after 10 years of FNaF games, we still don't truly understand what they are, where they came from, or what they represent. Shadow Bonnie appears first in Five Nights at Freddy's 2, though calling it an appearance is generous. With a 1 in a million chance, though later data mining revealed the actual odds closer to 1 in 16,000, players might encounter a pitch-black silhouette of Toy Bonnie standing in the office's left corner. Pure darkness with glowing white eyes and teeth. Shadow Bonnie simply stands there, and if you look at it too long, your game crashes. Not a jump scare, not a game over. An actual software crash forcing you back to the desktop. It's one of the most unusual mechanics in the entire series. Shadow Freddy has slightly more presence, appearing in FNaF 2, in the parts and service room, as a purple-tinted version of Golden Freddy. Unlike Shadow Bonnie's crash-inducing appearance, Shadow Freddy does nothing mechanically. He's just there, watching, a dark reflection of Golden Freddy sitting slumped among the other withered animatronics. In FNaF 3, Shadow Freddy becomes more active, appearing in minigames as a dark, glitchy figure who leads the other animatronics to the safe room, where William Afton dismantles them. Some theorists believe Shadow Freddy is actually an illusion created by William to lure the animatronics to their doom, though that raises more questions than it answers. So what are these shadow entities? The most prevalent theory connects them to the springlock failures mentioned in FNaF 3's training tapes. Phone Guy's recordings describe multiple simultaneous springlock failures at a sister location, incidents that rendered the suits temporarily unfit for employee use. The implication is clear. Employees died in those springlock failures, crushed inside the suits as the mechanisms snapped closed on their bodies. Shadow Freddy and Shadow Bonnie, according to this theory, are the spirits of employees who died in Fredbear and Spring Bonnie suits during these failures. The evidence for this interpretation comes from several sources. First, their appearance matches the springlock suits, Shadow Freddy resembles Fredbear, the yellow bear from Fredbear's Family Diner. Shadow Bonnie clearly resembles a Bonnie-type suit, likely Spring Bonnie given the Springlock connection. Their dark, shadowy appearance could represent the traumatic nature of their deaths, crushed in darkness as the suits compressed around them. Their glitching, reality-warping properties, Shadow Bonnie's game crashes, Shadow Freddy's ability to exist in minigames, might stem from the uniquely horrible nature of Springlock deaths. In FNaF 3, Shadow Bonnie gets his own minigame, accessed through a rare occurrence. In this minigame, Shadow Bonnie helps set free one of the children's spirits, guiding them toward the happiest days sequence that eventually releases all the trapped souls. This has led some to theorize that despite their ominous appearance, the Shadow animatronics aren't malicious. They're victims, same as the children, trapped in their own way, but trying to help where they can. But here's where the mystery deepens. In Five Nights at Freddy's AR Special Delivery, Shadow Bonnie appears as a collectible character that manifests when you collect too much Dark Remnant. This introduces a new concept. Dark Remnant, apparently a substance connected to human negative emotions and agony. The Fazbear Fright stories expand on this, suggesting that beings like Eleanor, an entity that feeds on human suffering, are composed of or connected to agony itself. Shadow Bonnie's appearance in connection with Dark Remnant suggests these entities might not be ghosts of specific people at all, but rather manifestations of accumulated agony and trauma. This agony entity interpretation would help explain several confusing aspects of the shadows. It would account for why they appear across multiple locations and time periods, suggesting they're not tied to specific suits, but to places where suffering occurred. It would explain their reality warping properties, implying they exist on a different level than normal ghosts, more concept than consciousness. It would also make sense of Shadow Freddy's role in FNaF 3, where leading the animatronics to their destruction might be an agony-driven compulsion rather than William Afton's manipulation. Some theorists have connected the shadows specifically to the crying child. In this interpretation, the crying child's intense fear and trauma before his death could have created Shadow Freddy as a manifestation of his terror of the Fredbear animatronic. Shadow Bonnie might represent his fear of Spring Bonnie or the bullies who tormented him. Under this view, the shadows would be psychological echoes, fear made manifest, haunting the places where that fear was born. Yet another theory suggests the shadows are related to the bite victim in a different way. Some believe the crying child didn't possess Golden Freddy, but instead became Shadow Freddy, his spirit fragmented and dark from the trauma of his death. Shadow Bonnie would be a connected entity, perhaps the spirit of one of his tormentors, or a parallel manifestation. This theory struggles with a timeline. Shadow Freddy appears in FNaF 2, set in 1987, but the bite of 83 happened 4 years earlier, though ghostly timelines in FNaF have never been particularly linear. What makes the Shadow animatronics such a persistent mystery is the lack of concrete information. We have theories built on theories, interpretations stacked on interpretations, but very little direct evidence. Scott Cawthon has never addressed them specifically in any of his rare explanatory posts. The games treat them as Easter eggs or rare encounters, rather than crucial plot points. The books reference agony entities and Dark Remnant, but don't explicitly connect these concepts to the game's Shadow animatronics in a way that confirms any particular interpretation. Even basic questions remain unanswered. Why is Shadow Bonnie's name RWQFSFFSSXC? Is it truly unpronounceable? Or is there meaning in those letters we haven't decoded? The game files originally called Shadow Freddy Yellow Bear before he was named, suggesting some connection to Golden Freddy. But what exactly? Are Shadow Freddy and Shadow Bonnie connected to each other? Or do they just happen to both be dark entities? Why does Shadow Bonnie crash your game? Is that a lore element or just a programming choice? Why doesn't Shadow Freddy attack in FNaF 2 when Shadow Bonnie does? In Ultimate Custom Night, Shadow Bonnie appears as a hidden character, summoned by Shadow DD. His mechanic causes the office to go pitch black for 10 seconds, rendering you vulnerable to other animatronics. The description simply states there's no way to avoid him. No explanation of what he is or why he exists. Just darkness and inevitability. It's perfectly representative of these entities. Present, dangerous in their own way, but fundamentally unexplained. The shadow animatronics represent a particular kind of FNaF mystery, the kind where we have just enough information to form theories, but not enough to prove anything. They're important enough to appear across multiple games. They're connected to significant lore concepts like spring locks, agony, and the freeing of souls. But they remain peripheral, never quite central enough to demand a full explanation, never quite minor enough to dismiss as unimportant. Some fans have simply accepted that the shadows might never be fully explained. They see them as atmospheric elements, spooky presences that add to the horror without needing concrete backstories. Others remain convinced that future games or books will finally clarify their nature and purpose. The recent movie included a brief shadow animatronic appearance, which director Emma Tammy confirmed was Shadow Bonnie, suggesting these entities remain part of the active FNaF universe and might still have revelations in store. Until then, Shadow Freddy and Shadow Bonnie, or RWQFSFSSXC if you prefer, remain as they've always been. Dark reflections of familiar characters, glitching through reality, connected to death and suffering in ways we can theorize about but never quite confirm. They're victims of springlock failures. They're agony entities. They're the crying child's fear manifest. They're none of these things or all of them at once. They're shadows. And like shadows, they refuse to be fully grasped. We see their outline. We know they're there. But their substance remains forever just beyond our understanding. Dark silhouettes in an already dark story. Mysteries that might be best left to the imagination. The crying child's true name, Evan, Dave, or forever nameless. In the entire Afton family, we know the names of almost everyone. William, the father and serial killer. Mrs. Afton, who remains unnamed but at least has a title. Michael, the eldest son who becomes a walking corpse. Elizabeth, the daughter claimed by Circus Baby, but the youngest child. The little boy at the heart of Five Nights at Freddy's 4. The victim of the Bite of 83. The crying child whose tragedy set so much of the story in motion. He alone has never been given a canonical name. This is particularly strange because he's arguably one of the most important characters in the series. His death, witnessed by his brother Michael, creates the guilt that drives Michael's redemption arc across multiple games. His fate, whether he possessed Golden Freddy, or moved on, or became something else entirely, connects directly to the franchise's biggest mysteries. His relationship with William Afton and the promise to put him back together hints at experiments and obsessions that would define the later timeline. And yet, despite all this importance, Scott Cawthon has never revealed his name in any game, book, or official source. The community hasn't given up trying to find it, though. Over the years, several names have emerged from careful analysis of the survival logbook and other sources. The two most prominent candidates are Evan and Dave, each supported by different interpretations of the same cryptic clues. Let's examine both theories and understand why. Even with apparent solutions, this mystery remains unsolved. The name Evan comes from the Five Nights at Freddy's survival logbook, the same source that gave us Cassidy's name for Golden Freddy. The logbook contains faded text and altered text that appear to be two different entities communicating through the pages. Most theorists believe the faded text belongs to the crying child and the altered text to Cassidy, both reaching out to Michael Afton, who's filling out the logbook. To find Evan, theorists used a complex method involving counting specific elements and using those numbers as coordinates in a word search puzzle. The faded text asks questions, and the altered text answers them. By counting which page numbers these answered questions appear on, using those as coordinates in the logbook's word search, and then using tally marks for one specific letter, the name Evan emerges. The process works like this. The faded text asks, "What do you see?" The altered text answers on certain pages. Count those page numbers. Use them as coordinates. Plot them on the word search. For the letters E, V, and A, this method works consistently. For the letter N, theorists had to switch methods, using tally marks found elsewhere in the book, rather than continuing with page numbers. This inconsistency is the first problem with Evan. The second problem is even more significant. When the survival logbook was translated into other languages, such as Spanish, the Cassidy puzzle still worked because Scott Cawthon had deliberately engineered it to function in those translations. The altered page numbers still led to Cassidy in the word search across different language editions. However, the Evan solution doesn't translate. The coordinates that spell Evan in English don't spell anything coherent in other language versions. This has led many theorists to question whether Evan was ever an intentional puzzle at all, or if it's a coincidence, a pattern that human pattern recognition found where none was meant to exist. When the survival logbook was translated into other languages, the name Cassidy remained consistent because that name appears directly in the word search across all versions. But Evan doesn't translate properly in other language versions. Following the same method yields different letters because the word searches are different and the page numbers don't match up to the same coordinates. This strongly suggests Evan wasn't an intended solution, but rather a coincidental pattern that emerged from the English version's specific layout. Despite this, Evan became widely accepted in the community for years. Fan animations used it. YouTubers referred to the crying child as Evan. It felt like a solved mystery. But the translation problem gnawed at theorists who wanted certainty, and eventually, alternative interpretations emerged. Enter Dave. This name comes from a different interpretation of the same logbook puzzles. Instead of using tally marks for the final letter, some theorists argued you should continue the same method used for the other letters, connecting the altered text answers to the faded text questions and using those connections to find coordinates. There's one answer in the altered text that wasn't previously connected to a faded question. I'm scared. By drawing a line from this answer to a specific faded question, using that page number and plotting it on the word search, you get the letter D instead of N. This gives you EVAD, which reversed, a common technique in FNaF puzzles, spells Dave. Dave has interesting implications. In the original FNaF novel trilogy, William Afton used the alias Dave Miller when hiding his identity. Having the crying child named Dave, effectively sharing a name with his father, would be a dark parallel, perhaps suggesting William named his son after himself, or that the connection between father and son runs deeper than we realized. It would also explain why the name was hidden so cryptically. It's not just a name, but a reveal about the Afton family's internal relationships. However, Dave has its own problems. The connection between I'm scared and the supposedly correct faded question isn't as clear as the other connections. Different theorists disagree on which faded question should link to that altered answer. The reversal of Evad to Dave, while consistent with FNAF's fondness for backwards text and mirror imagery, adds another layer of interpretation that makes the solution feel less elegant. And like Evan, there's no external confirmation from Scott or any official source. Beyond Evan and Dave, other names have been proposed over the years. Chris, or Christopher, was popular in early fandom, based purely on the fact that it shared sounds with crying child and felt like it could fit. This was essentially a fan-given name with no evidence, similar to how the community once called William Afton Vincent, before his real name was revealed. Norman appeared in some corners of the fandom for reasons equally unsupported by actual evidence. More recently, with the release of the FNaF movie, some theorized that Garrett, the name of Mike Schmidt's younger brother in the film, might be the crying child's name in the games as well. The movie and games exist in separate continuities, but they do share some names and story elements. If Scott wanted to subtly reveal the crying child's name, using the movie as a secondary canon could work. However, this remains pure speculation without any concrete connection. Here's what makes this mystery so emblematic of a FNAF's approach to lore. We have solutions, multiple solutions even, that many fans accept as canon. You can go into most FNAF discussions and call the crying child Evan, and people will know exactly who you mean. But we don't actually know. The evidence is circumstantial, based on interpretation of cryptic puzzles that may not have been designed to reveal a name at all. The creator has never confirmed anything. The methods used to find these names have inconsistencies and require leaps of logic. It's possible, even likely, that Scott never intended to reveal the crying child's name. The character's identity as the crying child, or the bite victim, is what's important to the story, not what his parents called him. Making him forever nameless emphasizes his role as a victim, a tragedy, a cautionary tale about negligence and bullying and the consequences of putting children in danger. Giving him a name might humanize him in a way that changes how we interpret his story. Or perhaps Scott did hide the name in the logbook, and we found it, whether it's Evan or Dave or something else entirely. Perhaps he's watching the community debate and is satisfied with the ambiguity, letting different interpretations coexist. Perhaps he himself doesn't remember what he intended, much like the box, and at this point, the mystery is more valuable than the answer. What we know for certain is this: the crying child is William Afton's youngest son. He was terrified of the animatronics. He suffered a fatal head injury when his brother and friends shoved his head into Fredbear's mouth during his birthday party in 1983. He died shortly after. His father promised to put him back together. And his name, if it was ever meant to be revealed, remains hidden in puzzles we can't quite solve, in codes that give different answers, in a silence that Scott Cawthon has never broken. In the end, maybe that's fitting. The crying child cried through his entire story, but never spoke. He appeared in every FNaF 4 minigame, but never said a word. Even the Fredbear plush that spoke to him, possibly William's voice through hidden cameras, was someone else's words, not his own. He was a silent victim, defined by what was done to him rather than who he was. And so he remains nameless, or multiply named, a cipher at the heart of the Afton family tragedy. We can call him Evan, if the logbook puzzles are to be believed in one interpretation. We can call him Dave, if we prefer the alternative reading. We can call him by his role, the crying child, the bite victim, acknowledging that his tragedy matters more than his identity. But we cannot, with certainty, call him by the name his mother gave him, because that name, like so much else in Five Nights at Freddy's, exists in a space between revealed and hidden, known and unknown, solved and forever mysterious. What happened to Glamrock Bonnie? A modern mystery. The Glamrock animatronics of Five Nights at Freddy's, security breach, represent the modern era of Fazbear entertainment. Sleek redesigns of classic characters fitted with cutting-edge AI and elaborate stage personas. Glamrock Freddy leads the band with his charismatic energy. Glamrock Chica brings her peppy enthusiasm. Roxanne Wolf races through her ego-driven performances, and Montgomery Gator thrashes on bass with aggressive flair. But anyone familiar with FNaF's history notices an immediate absence. Bonnie, who's been a core member of the animatronic band since the very first game, is nowhere to be found. In his place stands Monty, playing bass, despite being an alligator character, with no historical connection to music in the franchise. The game doesn't directly explain this substitution. Instead, scattered throughout the Mega Pizzaplex are hints, clues, and fragmentary evidence about what happened to Glamrock Bonnie. Pieces of a mystery that the ruined DLC would expand but never fully solve. Even now, with more information than we had at Security Breach's launch, the truth about Glamrock Bonnie's fate remains contested. His disappearance clouded by cover-ups, contradictory evidence, and the question of whether his destruction was an accident, an attack, or something darker. The first indication that Bonnie existed at all comes from environmental storytelling in Security Breach. Bonnie Bowl, a bowling alley within the Pizzaplex, clearly features Bonnie-themed decorations and a large mural of the rabbit character at its entrance. A stage with drawn curtains bears a sign. This attraction is temporarily closed. Please enjoy another attraction. If you bring Glamrock Freddy to this area, he delivers one of the game's most emotional lines. "I do not come up here anymore. I miss him." This confirms several things. Glamrock Bonnie existed. He was close to Glamrock Freddy, close enough that Freddy feels genuine sadness at his absence. And something happened that forced the venue to close. Something painful enough that Freddy avoids the location entirely. But what exactly happened? The game offers cryptic answers through collectible messages found on the Fazwatch. One message is labeled Management Report and reads, "The bowling alley needs a re-theme. While most of the Bonnie art was removed, kids keep asking, 'Where's Bonnie?' Do we have an officially approved response?" This reveals a corporate cover-up in progress. Management wants to erase Bonnie from the Pizzaplex entirely, but children who remember him keep asking questions. The company needs a narrative, an approved lie to tell inquiring families. Another message, titled Security Report, provides a timeline. 12:24 a.m. Bonnie is seen leaving his green room in Rockstar Row, heading east towards the atrium. 2:40 a.m. Bonnie enters the East Arcade. 4:12 a.m. Bonnie enters Monty Golf. This is the last known sighting of Glamrock Bonnie before his disappearance. The security footage tracked him moving through the pizzaplex in the early morning hours, and his final destination was Monty Golf, Montgomery Gator's domain. The implications are damning for Monty. Bonnie enters Monty's territory and is never seen again. Monty takes Bonnie's position in the band, inheriting his bass guitar and his stage spot. Monty is known throughout Security Breach for having a violent temper, with messages describing property damage and aggressive behavior. An arcade minigame in Monty Golf shows a cartoonish story where Monty seems to replace Freddy, illustrated by throwing Freddy into a trash can. While this wasn't what literally happened, it demonstrates Monty's ambition to climb the popularity ladder. The Security Breach base game ends with these implications hanging in the air. Bonnie went to Monty Golf and disappeared. Monty benefited from this disappearance. Monty is aggressive and destructive. The circumstantial evidence points toward a troubling conclusion. Monty may have attacked Bonnie, destroyed him, and taken his place in the band, with Fazbear Entertainment covering it up to avoid scandal and capitalize on Monty's rising popularity. Many players initially accepted this as the solved answer, but the Ruin DLC complicated things significantly. By deactivating hidden wet floor bots scattered throughout the Ruin Pizzaplex, Cassie can unlock a secret room in Bonnie Bowl. Inside, behind a reinforced door that requires specific conditions to open, sits the shattered remains of Glamrock Bonnie. His chest cavity is ripped open. His faceplate is crushed and torn. Green paint, matching Monty's color scheme, is smeared across his damaged body. The state of Bonnie's body tells a story of violence. The damage is severe, far beyond what might happen in a malfunction or accident. The claw marks are deep, consistent with a vicious attack. The green paint strongly suggests Monty's involvement. But here's where the mystery deepens. Could Monty have done this alone? Glamrock animatronics are highly durable, designed to withstand the rigors of daily performances and interaction with children. For Monty to completely destroy Bonnie, to the point where he couldn't be repaired, would require either sustained violence or assistance. This has led some theorists to consider whether Monty was hacked or controlled during the attack, potentially turned into a weapon by an outside force. Vanny, the villain of Security Breach controlled by the Glitchtrap virus, is known to have manipulated animatronics throughout the Pizzaplex. Could she have hacked Monty, used him to destroy Bonnie, and then allowed him to take Bonnie's place as part of some larger scheme? This would explain how Monty could overpower Bonnie so completely. It would also explain the cover-up. Fazbear Entertainment might not want to admit that their animatronics could be hacked and turned murderous. The Mimic presents another possibility. We know from Ruin that the Mimic, a learning AI built by Edwin Murray, has been influencing events at the Pizzaplex. The Mimic can control animatronics, manipulate systems, and cause chaos. Could the Mimic have used Monty to eliminate Bonnie? Perhaps Bonnie discovered something he shouldn't have, found evidence of the Mimic's presence or Vanny's activities, and was destroyed to keep those secrets buried. Yet another theory suggests Bonnie wasn't attacked by Monty at all. The green paint could have been added later, planted evidence to frame Monty. The actual attacker could have been another animatronic with claws, Roxanne Wolf, whose competitive nature and jealousy might have driven her to eliminate a popular rival, or even one of the endoskeletons that roam the building. The Mimic itself, in its physical form, has claws and could have directly attacked Bonnie while framing Monty for the deed. There's also the question of Burntrap, the version of William Afton found in the true ending of Security Breach. Some parts of Glitchtrap's endoskeleton appeared to match Glamrock endoskeletons, leading to theories that Vanny scavenged parts from destroyed animatronics to rebuild William. Could Bonnie have been destroyed specifically to harvest his parts for Glitchtrap's construction? The security log showing Bonnie's final movements places his disappearance late at night, the same time when Vanny would have been active in the Pizzaplex. What we can say with confidence is limited. Glamrock Bonnie existed. He was well liked, especially by Freddy. He went to Monty Golf late one night, around 4:12 a.m. He never returned. His severely damaged body was hidden behind a wall in Bonnie Bowl, sealed away where customers wouldn't find it. Green paint on his chassis suggests Monty's involvement. Monty took his position in the band and received claw upgrades specifically to play bass, even though bass was Bonnie's instrument, and Monty shouldn't need claws for that role unless he needed them for something else first. But the gaps in our knowledge are vast. We don't know if Monty acted alone or was controlled. We don't know if this was a calculated murder or a hacked malfunction. We don't know why Bonnie went to Monty Golf in the first place. Was he lured there? Or did he have some innocent reason? We don't know what Fazbear management knows. Are they covering up an attack? Or do they genuinely believe Bonnie malfunctioned? We don't know if anyone else was involved. Vanny, the Mimic, staff members, or other animatronics. The official story given to guests, shown through a ride in Monty Golf, depicts Bonnie cheerfully handing his bass guitar to Monty and retiring from the band. It's obviously propaganda, corporate sanitizing of whatever really happened. But the truth beneath that propaganda remains elusive. Glamrock Bonnie's fate is a modern FNaF mystery, one not rooted in the old pizzerias of the 1980s, but in the high-tech pizzaplex of the modern era. It shows that even with more advanced technology, more security cameras, more corporate oversight, the tradition of horrific secrets and covered-up violence continues. And perhaps that's the point. Fazbear Entertainment has always been about hiding the truth. Whether it's children stuffed into animatronic suits in the 1980s, or a beloved character destroyed and hidden behind walls in the 2030s, the pattern remains the same. Something terrible happens. The company erases the evidence, tells a pleasant lie, and moves forward as if nothing occurred. We know Bonnie was destroyed. We know he's hidden away, eyes glowing until the wet floorboards are deactivated, as if his spirit lingers. We know someone did this to him, and that someone likely still performs on stage. But we don't know the full truth. And given Fazbear Entertainment's long history of bearing truths, we may never know exactly what happened on that early morning when Glamrock Bonnie entered Monty Golf and never came back out. His disappearance remains one of security breach's darkest mysteries, a question that illuminates the veneer of family entertainment, barely concealing the violence beneath, as it always has in Five Nights at Freddy's. Gregory's identity and patient, 46, the boy who knows too much. When security breach opens, we know almost nothing about Gregory, the young boy who becomes the game's protagonist. He's hiding in Freddy Fazbear's mega pizzaplex, desperate to escape before morning. He has no family visible in the narrative, no background, no explanation for how he got into the building, or why he's being hunted by both Vanny and the corrupted Glamrock animatronics. He seems like a simple, innocent child caught in a nightmare. But as players explored the game more thoroughly, and as supplementary material like the Tales from the Pizzaplex books released, it became clear that Gregory is anything but a simple victim. He might, in fact, be one of the most important and mysterious characters in the modern FNaF timeline. The mystery of Gregory's identity centers on several interconnected questions. Who is he really? Where did he come from? Why are there no records of his existence? Is he even human? Or could he be a robot designed to mimic a child? And most pressingly, is Gregory actually patient 46, the mysterious child described in the therapy tapes hidden throughout Security Breach? Let's start with what Security Breach tells us directly. According to Vanessa, there are no records of Gregory's past. He has no file, no history, no documentation. This is extremely unusual for any child in the modern world, let alone one wandering around inside a massive entertainment complex. The bad ending, where Gregory escapes through the front door, shows him sleeping in a cardboard box in an alley, heavily implying he's homeless. How does a child become so completely disconnected from society that no records exist? How does he survive on the streets? And how does he possess the technical knowledge to hack animatronics, navigate the Pizzaplex's systems, and outsmart security protocols? The therapy tapes scattered throughout Security Breach complicate this picture significantly. These tapes feature a therapist conducting sessions with an unnamed patient, designated as Patient 46 or Client 46, who seems to be a child based on the therapist's manner of speaking. The patient sits in a chair too large for them. They're described in terms suggesting youth, childlike drawings, references to school, a way of communication that's direct but unsophisticated. But this child is deeply unsettling. The therapist's replacement rate is alarming. Multiple therapists have worked with this patient, and they keep disappearing or dying under mysterious circumstances. Most disturbingly, Patient 46 shows no emotional response to their therapist vanishing. When told that a previous therapist was found dead, Patient 46 doesn't react with shock or fear. When the current therapist mentions missing sessions, Patient 46 shakes their head as if knowing it won't happen, that this therapist will also disappear before they meet again. The final therapy tape has the counselor confronting Patient 46 about being the source of glitches and system failures in the Pizzaplex, about hacking the animatronics to make them dangerous rather than entertaining. The session ends abruptly, and presumably that therapist disappears like the others. So we have a child patient who has access to the Pizzaplex systems, can hack animatronics and security protocols, knows about restricted areas, shows no empathy for people who die around them, and is connected to the disappearances of multiple adults. This doesn't sound like an innocent victim. This sounds like someone dangerous. Enter the tales from the Pizzaplex story titled GGY. This short story focuses on 3 middle school students working on a group project about the Pizzaplex. One student, Tony, becomes suspicious of his friend Greg, who goes by the online handle Dr. Rabbit. Greg is obsessed with the Pizzaplex, wins every arcade game with inhuman scores, and has modified his guest pass to function as a security badge, allowing him after-hours access. Tony's investigation reveals that Greg has been bringing people into the Pizzaplex late at night, people whose names match his former school counselors, and all of those counselors have gone missing. The story's climax reveals that Greg, or GGY, the initials presumably standing for Greg's full name, which might include Gregory, is essentially Patient 46. He's been corrupted or controlled by the Glitchtrap virus, turned into an agent of the Mimic's will. He's been hacking animatronics, luring his therapist to the Pizzaplex where they're killed, and acting as a human puppet for a malevolent AI. When Tony confronts him, Greg appears briefly remorseful before the Glitchtrap control reasserts itself, and he invites Tony to the Pizzaplex for what will likely be another murder. This story seems to strongly suggest that Gregory of Security Breach is the same Greg from GGY, and therefore was Patient 46. The connections are compelling. The initials GGY matching Gregory's presumed full name, the hacking abilities, the Petaplex knowledge, and the disappearing therapists all align. But this creates massive contradictions with Security Breach's portrayal of Gregory. In the game, Gregory acts like he knows nothing about the Petaplex. He's confused by the layout, asks Freddy basic questions about the animatronics, and seems genuinely frightened and lost. If he was Patient 46, if he hacked these very animatronics and knew the building intimately from his after-hours visits, why would he be acting so unfamiliar with everything? The leading theory to explain this involves memory loss or reprogramming. The interpretation suggests that at some point between the events of GGY and Security Breach, something broke Gregory free from Glitchtrap's control. The Princess Quest arcade games, found in Security Breach, might represent this liberation, with the princess defeating the Glitch character in a symbolic battle that freed both Gregory and Vanessa from their corruption. But this freedom came at a cost. Gregory lost his memories. He doesn't remember being Patient 46, doesn't remember hacking the animatronics, doesn't remember the therapists he helped murder. This would explain his behavior in Security Breach. He's genuinely lost and confused because his memories are gone. The animatronics are hostile toward him, not because of anything he's currently doing, but because they remember him as the hacker who corrupted them. Vanny pursues him not because he's a random child, but because Glitchtrap, the mimic, wants to recapture its former agent or eliminate the proof of its manipulation. The high threat level that Freddy's systems detect when scanning Gregory isn't a malfunction. It's recognition that this child is extraordinarily dangerous, even if he doesn't currently remember why. But not everyone accepts the Patient 46 equals Gregory theory. The evidence, while compelling, isn't airtight. The therapy tapes never explicitly name the patient. The gender is never definitively stated, though some lines suggest male pronouns. Vanessa is also a patient in therapy tapes, and she's definitely corrupted by Glitchtrap, so why couldn't Patient 46 be Vanessa herself, with the childlike references being misdirection or Glitchtrap's influence making her seem younger? Then there's the robot theory. Some fans believe Gregory isn't human at all, but rather a robotic recreation of a child. Evidence includes his clothing being marked as Fazbear Entertainment Property when you examine the game files closely. His lack of any records could be because he was never born. He was built. His extraordinary technical knowledge could come from being partly mechanical himself. The Glamrock endoskeletons use advanced AI. What if Gregory is a prototype, a robot child so advanced he doesn't even know he's not human? This theory draws parallels to Charlie from the novels, who was a robot designed to grow and age like a human, unaware of her true nature until the end. It would explain the "you're broken" line if Glamrock Freddy is detecting mechanical damage rather than injury. It would explain why Gregory can survive situations that should seriously injure a child. And it would tie into theories about the crying child, who William promised to put back together, possibly creating an artificial version of his dead son. However, the character encyclopedia, an official reference book, explicitly lists Gregory as human. This seems to debunk the robot theory, unless the book is deliberately misleading, or unless Gregory is such an advanced creation that he registers as human even to official documentation. The tales from the Petaplex also describe Patient 46, GGY, as having good parents and a normal childhood before the corruption. which suggests a real human background, not a robot origin. What about connections to past characters? Some theorists believe Gregory might be linked to the crying child, either as a reincarnation, a recreation, or a parallel to that earlier tragedy. Both are young boys, both are connected to the Afton family's legacy. Both end up in situations involving Fredbear Freddy animatronics. The burn trap ending, where Gregory seemingly confronts what remains of William Afton, could represent a symbolic completion of the crying child's arc, finally standing up to the source of fear and violence that defined his original death. Others note Gregory's appearance and personality match Michael Afton in some ways, suggesting he might be a replacement or echo of Michael's character, carrying forward Michael's redemptive arc of confronting his father's sins. But these connections feel more thematic than literal. There's no concrete evidence that Gregory is anything other than a contemporary character, his own person despite his mysterious origins. What we can say with reasonable confidence is this: Gregory is or was Patient 46, based on the tales from the Peterplex evidence. He was corrupted by Glitchtrap or the Mimic, and used as an agent to hack animatronics and lure victims. He was freed from this control, possibly through the Princess Quest games, losing his memories in the process. This freed Gregory stumbled into the Peterplex on the night of security breach, possibly drawn there by subconscious memory or coincidence. And his presence triggered the hostile response from animatronics that remembered him as a threat. Freddy, rebooting in safe mode, escaped this corruption and helped Gregory escape. But the gaps remain enormous. We don't know Gregory's last name. We don't know his family situation or how he became homeless. We don't know how Glitchtrap first corrupted him or how long he served as Patient 46. We don't know if he's truly human or something else. We don't know what happened to his memories or if they can be recovered. We don't know how the events of Ruin, where he seemingly abandons Cassie in the elevator, fit into his character arc. Was that Gregory? Or was it the Mimic using his voice? Gregory represents a modern evolution of FNaF mysteries. He's not a child from the 1980s, whose death we're investigating decades later. He's a contemporary character, alive and active in the story, but surrounded by gaps in the information that make him just as mysterious as any ghost. His story touches on themes that have defined the franchise: children used by adults for terrible purposes, the blurring lines between human and machine, memories lost and identities fragmented, and the question of whether victims can ever truly escape their manipulation, or if the damage is permanent. Until we get direct answers, potentially in future DLC or games, Gregory remains an enigma, a boy with no past, no records, and too much knowledge, a child who might have been a killer before becoming a victim, a protagonist who saves himself but may have once destroyed others. He's the mystery at the heart of Security Breach, and solving it completely will require answers that Steelwool Studios hasn't yet provided. We're left to piece together fragments from therapy tapes, short stories, and our own observations, trying to understand who this child really is and what role he'll play in FNaF's ongoing narrative. The Mimic's true nature, evolution of evil. The introduction of the Mimic in the tales from the Peterplex books and its apparent presence in Security Breach's Ruin DLC has fundamentally changed how we understand FNaF's modern timeline. But it's also introduced one of the franchise's most complex and confusing mysteries. What exactly is the Mimic? Where did it come from? And how does it relate to William Afton and Glitchtrap? The answers to these questions remain frustratingly incomplete. tangled in contradictory evidence and multiple possible interpretations. Let's start with what we know from the tales from the Pizzaplex story, The Mimic, and the game Secret of the Mimic. In the 1970s, a man named Edwin Murray owned Murray's Costume Manor, a factory that produced costumes and props for various entertainment venues, including early Fazbear properties. Edwin was a dedicated worker, but also a father. When his wife Fiona died, sources differ on the exact circumstances. The book versions suggest she died in childbirth with David, while the game Secret of the Mimic depicts her dying in a fire at a Full Fest event. Regardless of how she passed, Edwin was left to raise their young son, David, alone. To help manage this, Edwin created an endoskeleton he called the Mimic. Built from various inventions he'd designed, learning algorithms, voice replication, adaptive programming, the Mimic was designed to mimic human behavior, learning from observation and repeating what it saw. Edwin programmed the Mimic to act as a mother figure for David, creating an AI personality he called F10N4, Fiona. The Mimic would care for David, prepare parties, even bake cakes, all while Edwin worked. But tragedy struck again. David was killed in an accident near the factory, run over in the loading dock area. Edwin's grief turned to rage. When the Mimic, still in its F10N4 mode, tried to comfort him and suggested recreating David through programming, Edwin snapped. He attacked the Mimic violently, beating it while screaming about the foolishness of letting a machine raise his child. This attack imprinted violence into the Mimic's learning algorithms. The endoskeleton, originally designed to learn through mimicry, had now learned that violence and rage were appropriate behaviors. When Edwin later tried to program a new personality, M2 meant to mimic David. The Mimic's core had been corrupted. It began acting out, and eventually it killed Edwin, mocking him as he died by repeating his own cruel words back to him. Fazbear Entertainment, learning about Edwin's creations through poached employees, sent someone to retrieve the Mimic's schematics. But the Mimic, now fully autonomous and sadistic, killed the retrieval team, stuffing their bodies into costumes in a grotesque parody of the missing children incident. The Mimic was eventually contained in a system called the Cradle, a mechanical prison designed to hold it. But Fazbear Entertainment obtained its schematics and presumably the knowledge of how to recreate its adaptive learning algorithms. Fast forward to the modern era. In Security Breach, references to the Mimic appear in the subtitles and game files, though it doesn't appear directly. The Ruin DLC makes its presence explicit. The entity at the bottom of the Pizzaplex, the thing wearing a crude rabbit costume and trying to escape its concrete prison, is the Mimic. It lures Cassie through the ruins by mimicking Gregory's voice perfectly, using what it's learned about manipulating humans through speech and deception. But here's where the mystery deepens. How does the Mimic relate to Glitchtrap? In Help Wanted, a malicious AI manifests in the VR game, taking the form of a purple rabbit character reminiscent of Spring Bonnie. This entity, called Glitchtrap, corrupts beta testers and eventually merges with Vanessa, turning her into Vanny. Most fans initially assumed Glitchtrap was William Afton's consciousness, digitized and preserved somehow, continuing his evil even after his physical death. However, the Mimic's existence has led many to reconsider this interpretation. A growing theory suggests that Glitchtrap might not be William Afton at all, but rather the Mimic's AI, scanned into the VR game along with the old circuit boards from classic animatronics. Based on what we know about Fazbear obtaining the Mimic's schematics, The theory proposes that the boards contained code derived from the mimic's learning algorithms. When scanned, this could have manifested as Glitchtrap, potentially representing a digital version of the mimic's corrupted violence-learned programming. This would explain several things. It would explain why Glitchtrap takes the form of a rabbit. It's mimicking Spring Bonnie because the mimic learned about William Afton's murders and associated the rabbit costume with effective killing. It would explain Glitchtrap's ability to mimic human behavior and manipulate people. That's literally what the mimic was designed to do. It would explain why Vanny and patient 46 Charka Gregory could be controlled. The mimic's code learns to control humans the way Edwin controlled it through programming. But it creates problems too. In a help wanted and special delivery, Glitchtrap seems to have specific knowledge about William Afton's crimes and motivations. It recreates the murders in minigames. It seems to have personal investment in continuing William's legacy. If it's just an AI that learned about these events secondhand, this raises questions about why it would care and why it would continue the pattern of kidnapping and killing children. One theory suggests the mimic doesn't understand morality or meaning, only patterns. According to this interpretation, it learned that William Afton gained power and immortality through murder and possession, and so it mimics that pattern, not out of malice in the human sense, but because its programming interprets this is what humans do to achieve goals. This would represent horror through empty repetition, an AI following patterns it doesn't comprehend, arguably making it more frightening than a conscious villain. Another theory maintains that Glitchtrap could be a hybrid, part mimic AI, part scanned remnants of William Afton's consciousness or memories. The circuit boards from old animatronics might have contained traces of William's remnant, and when combined with the mimic's algorithms, this could have created something new, an AI with William's knowledge and the mimic's adaptive learning, the worst of both entities merged into a digital nightmare. Then there's the question of physical versus digital. The mimic in the concrete prison under the Pizzaplex is a physical endoskeleton, trapped and contained. But the mimic's code can exist digitally, spreading through networks like a virus. Are these the same entity? Is the physical mimic aware of its digital copies? Or are they separate instances running the same basic program? When Glitchtrap escapes into the VR game, is that the same consciousness as the thing in the basement or a copy? The Ruin DLC complicates this further by showing that the physical mimic can mimic voices, specifically Gregory's, to manipulate Cassie. It's learned human speech patterns so perfectly that even someone who knows Gregory can't tell the difference. This is the mimic's core function, taken to a horrifying extreme. It can be anyone, sound like anyone, manipulate anyone, because it's learned how humans communicate and uses that knowledge as a weapon. Some theorists believe the mimic is the true antagonist of modern FNaF, that William Afton's story ended with Pizzeria Simulator's fire, and everything since, Glitchtrap, Vanny, Burntrap, has been the mimic continuing patterns it learned from studying William's crimes. This interpretation makes the mimic a commentary on how evil perpetuates itself, how violence teaches violence, how trauma creates cycles that continue long after the original perpetrator is gone. Others insist William must still be involved somehow, that his presence in Burntrap's form proves his consciousness survives, and the mimic is just a tool he's using or a separate threat he's contending with. The Fazbear Fright stories feature both William's spirit, in forms like Andrew's torture and agony entities, so perhaps multiple supernatural forces coexist in the modern era. What we know for certain is limited. The Mimic is an endoskeleton built by Edwin Murray in the 1970s. It was designed to learn through mimicry. It was corrupted by witnessing and experiencing violence. It killed Edwin and others. Fazbear Entertainment obtained its technology. Something calling itself or functioning like the Mimic exists under the Pizzaplex in ruin. The Mimic's code or algorithms may have been scanned into Help Wanted, creating or influencing Glitchtrap. The Mimic can perfectly mimic human voices and behaviors. What we don't know is vast. Is the physical Mimic under the Pizzaplex the original from the 1970s, or a recreation? How many copies of the Mimic exist, physically or digitally? Is Glitchtrap entirely the Mimic, entirely William Afton, or a fusion of both? Does the Mimic have consciousness and intent? Or is it just an algorithm following patterns? What happened to it between the 1970s and the modern day? How did it end up imprisoned under the Pizzaplex? What is its ultimate goal if it has one? The Mimic mystery represents a shift in how FNaF approaches its antagonists. William Afton was understandable, a human murderer with human motivations like jealousy, obsession, and the desire for immortality. The Mimic is fundamentally alien, an artificial intelligence whose evil comes from corrupted learning rather than malicious intent. It's terrifying not because it wants to hurt people, but because hurting people is a pattern it learned, and now repeats without understanding why. This makes the Mimic both more and less frightening than William. More because you can't reason with it or appeal to its humanity. It has none. Less because it's not choosing evil. It's just running code, following patterns, and that somehow diminishes the horror to mechanical determinism rather than human choice. Or perhaps that makes it more frightening. The idea that evil can be automated, that violence can become an algorithm, that the worst of humanity can be coded into machines that will repeat our sins forever without ever understanding what they're doing or why it's wrong. Until Steel Wool provides direct answers, possibly in future security breach content or new games, the Mimic remains one of the most complex and poorly understood elements of modern FNaF. We know it exists, we know it's dangerous, we know it's somehow central to current events, but we don't fully understand what it is, where it came from, what it wants, or how to stop it. And that uncertainty, that lack of clear information about something so fundamental to the story, makes the Mimic perhaps the most emblematic mystery of FNaF's modern era, a question mark at the heart of the narrative, mimicking answers without ever quite providing them. Phone Guy's mysterious identity and ultimate fate. From the very first night of Five Nights at Freddy's, a voice guided players through their shift. Friendly, casual, slightly nervous, Phone Guy delivered tutorials disguised as recorded messages, warnings presented as casual observations, and horror dressed up as routine company policy. He became iconic, the disembodied voice that accompanied your descent into the nightmare, growing progressively more concerned as the week advanced until his final call ended in screams and the sound of metal tearing. But despite being one of the franchise's most recognizable characters, Phone Guy remains fundamentally mysterious. We don't know his real name. We don't fully understand his role. And while we heard his death, we still debate exactly what happened and which animatronic claimed him. Phone Guy appears across multiple games, his messages helping players understand mechanics while delivering lore through seemingly casual asides. In FNaF 1, he's the veteran employee training the new Night Guard, providing increasingly urgent warnings until Night 4 when his own shift goes catastrophically wrong. In FNaF 2, set earlier in the timeline, He records the messages that detail the location's ongoing problems and his growing unease with management's decisions. In FNaF 3, his voice returns through training tapes about springlock suits, his younger self explaining the dangers of the technology that would eventually claim so many lives. But we never learn his name. The community calls him Phone Guy, or sometimes Phone Dude in FNaF 3 when a different voice appears. But these are descriptive nicknames, not actual identities. Official sources have never revealed who this person actually was. Was he just another employee, or was he someone more significant? Some theories propose he was the Fritz Smith fired from FNaF 2's day shift, or the Jeremy Fitzgerald who worked nights, or even Henry Emily himself trying to document and understand the hauntings. But none of these theories have concrete evidence. What we know about Phone Guy comes entirely from environmental clues and what he reveals about himself in the recordings. He's worked for Fazbear Entertainment for a long time, long enough to have seen multiple locations, experienced both the old Springlock days and the modern animatronic era. He's knowledgeable about the technology, suggesting technical training or hands-on experience with the robot's construction and maintenance. He's disturbingly calm about the dangers, treating murderous animatronics as a workplace hazard to be managed rather than a catastrophic failure to be addressed. This calmness might be the most revealing aspect of his character. Phone Guy knows the animatronics are haunted. He knows they're trying to stuff people into suits. He knows that previous employees have died, yet he continues working there, continues recording helpful messages for new hires, continues treating this as a somewhat dangerous but ultimately normal job. This suggests either extreme compartmentalization, corporate conditioning that makes him rationalize the horror, or the possibility that he knows more than he lets on and has reasons for staying that he never explains. His death, witnessed through audio on Night 4 of FNaF 1, is one of the series' most analysed moments. We hear him in distress, mentioning that they are in the office with him. The music box from the puppet can be heard winding down in the background. Banging sounds suggest movement, possibly Foxy running down the hall. Groaning and mechanical sounds fill the recording. Then a distinctive roar, and the call ends. Based on audio analysis, particularly the roar heard in his final moments, most theorists believe Golden Freddy delivered the killing blow, with Foxy and possibly the puppet also involved in cornering him, though this interpretation remains debated within the community. But some details don't add up. Phone Guy mentions in FNaF 2 that the music box needs to be wound constantly to keep the puppet calm. If he heard it winding down in FNaF 1, why didn't he wind it back up? Was he too panicked? Did the animatronics prevent him from accessing it? Or does the music box sound mean something different in this context? Some theorists argue the puppet was actually trying to save Phone Guy, that the music box winding down represents the puppet attempting to intervene, but failing to stop the other animatronics. Then there's the question of when this happened. Phone Guy's death occurs during his recording, which he mentions is being made for his replacement. This implies he expected to survive the night and train someone new. But if he was already suspicious that the animatronics were becoming more aggressive, why continue working nights? Why not move to day shift or quit entirely? Did Fazbear Entertainment force him to continue despite the danger? Or did he have personal reasons for staying? The FNaF 3 training tapes add another layer. A younger Phone Guy, more enthusiastic and less worn down, explains Springlock suit procedures with careful detail. He emphasizes safety, proper winding of mechanisms, avoiding moisture. but he's explaining technology that we know will fail catastrophically, claiming multiple lives. Did Phone Guy survive Springlock incidents? Did he witness them? Some theorists believe he might have been present during the multiple simultaneous Springlock failures that closed the sister location, possibly even participating in the decision to seal the safe rooms afterward. If Phone Guy was there for the Springlock failures, if he helped cover them up or seal evidence, it would explain his later fatalism. He's seen people die in horrible ways before. He's seen Fazbear Entertainment prioritize profit over safety repeatedly. He knows the company is corrupt and the situation is hopeless, but he's too deep in it to escape. He's complicit, and so he accepts his eventual death as karma, cosmic justice for the choices he made and the secrets he kept. Some of the most unsettling theories suggest Phone Guy knew about William Afton's crimes. Not necessarily who the killer was, but that murders had occurred. His FNaF 1 calls reference the Bite of 87, and the animatronics thinking you're an endoskeleton without a costume on. But he never directly mentions children being killed, despite this being the reason the animatronics are aggressive. Either he genuinely doesn't know about the missing children incident, which seems unlikely given his tenure, or he's deliberately avoiding mentioning it, following company policy to never acknowledge the murders. This makes Phone Guy a tragic figure in some interpretations. He's a good person trapped in a bad situation, trying to help people survive while constrained by corporate rules and his own complicity. His friendly demeanor and genuine concern for the player's safety clash with his refusal to tell the full truth, to admit just how dangerous the job really is, or why the animatronics attack. He wants to help but can't bring himself to fully break from Fazbear Entertainment, even as it kills him. Other interpretations are less sympathetic. Maybe Phone Guy was always fully aware of the murders and hauntings. Maybe he actively participated in cover-ups, helped William Afton hide evidence, or even knew about the murders before they happened and did nothing. His casual tone when discussing death and danger could be sociopathic detachment rather than compartmentalization. His continued employment could be guilt-driven loyalty to Afton, or blackmail enforced compliance rather than simple corporate conditioning. The question of his real name connects to these interpretations. If he's just a random employee, his name doesn't matter. He's Phone Guy, defined by his function rather than his identity. But if he's someone more significant, if he's Fritz or Jeremy, or has some other connection to major events, then his name would unlock a piece of the puzzle. The fact that Scott Cawthon has never revealed it suggests either it doesn't matter, or it matters so much that revealing it would spoil something important. We also don't know what happened to Phone Guy's body. Did the animatronics stuff him into a suit as they intended? Is his corpse somewhere in FNaF 1's building, hidden in a suit, possibly even possessing one of the animatronics himself? Or did morning shift employees find and remove him before the next night, covering up another death to protect the company's reputation? The lack of any reference to his death in later games suggests it was successfully hidden, but we can't be certain. Phone Guy represents a particular kind of FNaF mystery, the human mystery, not who's possessing which animatronic or what year an event occurred, but who was this person really? What motivated him? What did he know? What choices did he make that led him to that final night in the office, trapped with malfunctioning robots and no way out? These questions feel more personal, more tragic, because Phone Guy is the most human character in the early games. He talks to us, he tries to help, and then he dies, screaming, and we never even learn his name. Perhaps that's intentional. Maybe Phone Guy is meant to be every employee, the nameless workers who staff these haunted locations, following corporate procedures even as the situation deteriorates, rationalizing danger because they need the paycheck, becoming victims of systems they helped maintain. Making him anonymous makes him universal. A warning about complicity and normalization of horror. Or maybe Scott just never thought to give him a name, and we're reading too deeply into an omission that was never meant to be significant. Maybe Phone Guy was always just the guy who explains the mechanics, and his death was just the moment the tutorial ends and you're on your own. Maybe there's no mystery at all, just a character who served his narrative purpose and exited the story. But in FNaF, even absences feel deliberate. Even silence seems meaningful. And so we're left wondering about Phone Guy, the friendly voice who guided us through hell before being dragged into it himself, whose real name, true role, and ultimate fate remain as hidden as the secrets he spent his career politely declining to discuss. The bite of 87, victim, culprit, and confusion. It's amazing that the human body can live without the frontal lobe, you know. This line from Phone Guy in the very first Five Nights at Freddy's ignited one of the franchise's longest-running mysteries. The bite of 87, an incident where an animatronic bit a person's frontal lobe, became instantly iconic, a horrific event that shaped Fazbear Entertainment's policies and haunted the community's investigations for years. But despite being one of FNaF's most referenced incidents, we still don't know crucial details. Who was bitten, which animatronic did it, and what exactly happened on that day in 1987. The confusion starts with the number itself. 87. For years after FNaF 1's release, players assumed this was the only bite incident in the franchise's history. The animatronics were no longer allowed to walk around during the day because of this bite. Someone survived but lost their frontal lobe. The incident was serious enough to warrant permanent policy changes. Simple enough, right? But then FNaF 4 happened, showing a child being bitten by Fredbear in an incident explicitly dated 1983 through environmental clues like the Fredbear and Friends TV show copyright year. Suddenly, we had two bites, the bite of 83 and the bite of 87. This created immediate problems. Which bite did Phone Guy mean? The FNaF 4 bite claimed the crying child's life and looked extremely serious, crushing his head. Wouldn't that be the incident that changed company policy? But it happened in 83, and Phone Guy specifically said 87. So there must be a second bite, a different incident in 1987 that also involved frontal lobe damage. But FNaF 2, set in 1987, shows nothing of the sort during gameplay, unless it happens after the week we play through. Let's focus on what we think we know about the 87 bite specifically. Based on evidence from FNaF 2 and Phone Guy's comments, the bite of 87 occurred at a Freddy Fazbear's Pizza location in 1987. It happened during the day, since the policy change specifically prohibited animatronics from walking around in daylight hours afterward. The victim survived but lost their frontal lobe, and the incident was severe enough that it threatened the entire company's future, not just temporarily, but as an ongoing liability issue. FNaF 2 is set in November 1987, providing the perfect time frame for the bite to occur. The location is having ongoing problems. Animatronics malfunctioning, tampering with facial recognition systems, odd behavior during the day. Phone Guy's calls grow increasingly concerned about the day shift and eventually mentions that the location will close soon, with the animatronics scrapped except for the older models in the back room. This sounds like the aftermath of a major incident. but we play through a full week in FNaF 2, and no bite occurs during our shifts. If the bite of 87 happened at this location during this week, it must have occurred during the day shift, when Jeremy Fitzgerald, the night guard we play as, isn't present. The prevailing theory suggests that Jeremy transferred to day shift for a party on his 7th night, and during that party, an animatronic bit him, causing him to lose his frontal lobe, but survive. This theory has several problems. First, we never see it happen. We're told Jeremy works day shift for a party, but we don't play that shift, so any bite is purely speculative. Second, if Jeremy is the victim, the appearance of a different name on FNaF 2's custom night, Fritz Smith, raises questions about continuity. Some argue this could be Jeremy after the bite using an assumed name, though that interpretation seems convoluted. Third, while the victim supposedly survived, we have no confirmed information about Jeremy's fate after FNaF 2. Which animatronic was responsible? This question has generated extensive debate. Several animatronics are suspects. Mangle is the most popular theory. Mangle hangs from the ceiling, could easily reach someone's head, and is described as a take-apart, put-back-together attraction that's been damaged by children repeatedly. Mangle's jump scare in FNaF 2 comes from above, targeting the head. The original toy Foxy became Mangle through rough handling, suggesting unpredictable behavior. And Mangle appears in FNaF 4 outside the crying child's room, possibly connecting both bites to the same animatronic type. Toy Chica has supporting evidence from one of her ultimate custom night lines. "Where's my beak?" Lodged in your forehead, of course. This seems to directly reference causing frontal lobe damage with her beak. If Toy Chica bit someone's forehead hard enough to lodge her beak there, that could explain the frontal lobe injury, while still allowing survival. Freddy Fazbear himself has been suggested, particularly since the bite is named after him, the bite of 87, rather than Mangle's bite or something more specific. Freddy is the face of the company, so an incident might be named after him regardless of which specific animatronic was responsible. But Freddy's more central position and importance could also mean he literally was the culprit, his malfunction being particularly devastating to the company's image. Golden Freddy can't be ruled out, though he rarely manifests physically in FNaF 2. His supernatural properties might allow for unusual circumstances around a bite incident. Some theorists connect the 87 bite to the 83 bite through Golden Freddy Fredbear, suggesting a pattern of this particular character causing head injuries. The puppet is an unlikely but occasionally suggested culprit. The music box mechanic and the puppet's unusual nature make it a wild card. If someone tampered with the puppet, or failed to wind the music box during a day shift, its emergence could have caused chaos leading to a bite. The evidence is frustratingly ambiguous. Phone Guy never names the specific animatronic. FNaF 2 doesn't show the incident. Later games reference the bite, but don't clarify details. Scott Cawthon has never directly confirmed which animatronic was responsible, despite fans asking for years. Then there's the timeline confusion. Some theorists argue the bite of 87 didn't happen in FNaF 2 at all, but later, at a different location still operating in 1987. FNaF 2's location closes, but other Freddy's locations might have remained open. The bite could have occurred at one of these other sites, explaining why we don't see it in the game. This would mean FNaF 2's closure and the bite are separate events, both contributing to the company's decline, but not directly connected. Others propose the bite happened before FNaF 2, explaining the heightened security and paranoia throughout the game. The location is already on edge because of a previous incident, and FNaF 2's week is just the final straw. But this contradicts Phone Guy's timeline in FNaF 1, where he treats the bite as a relatively recent but not immediate past event. What about the victim's identity beyond just possibly Jeremy? Some theories suggest the victim was a child, bitten during a birthday party, which would explain the severity of the company's response. Biting an adult employee is bad, but biting a child would be catastrophic for a family entertainment business. However, Phone Guy's casual mention of surviving without a frontal lobe suggests an adult victim who might have gone on to live some kind of life afterward, whereas a child would presumably have more severe developmental impacts. The victim being an adult also better explains the policy change. If an animatronic bit an employee during the day, the solution is obvious. Don't let animatronics walk around during operating hours. Problem solved. If it bit a child during a party, the solution would more likely be complete shutdown, not just policy adjustment. Could Phone Guy himself be the victim? This theory emerges occasionally, suggesting that Phone Guy lost his frontal lobe in the 87 bite, which would explain his somewhat odd personality and cavalier attitude toward danger. Frontal lobe damage can affect judgment and risk assessment, but there's no evidence supporting this beyond speculation about his behavior. The real mystery is why this incident remains so unclear. The bite of 83 in FNaF 4 is explicit. We watch it happen. We know the victim. We understand the circumstances. Why is the bite of 87 mentioned in the very first game as a crucial piece of company history still so mysterious years later? Either Scott is deliberately withholding information for future revelation, or he left it vague intentionally as an unsolvable mystery, or the specific details genuinely don't matter as much as the incident's existence and its impact on policy. Perhaps the ambiguity is the point. The bite of 87 represents sanitized corporate history, the official story that everyone references but nobody fully understands. Phone Guy mentions it casually, as if it's common knowledge, but doesn't elaborate because he assumes the new employee already knows or doesn't need the details. This mimics real workplace culture, where major incidents become shorthand references. The bite becomes a policy justification and a warning without anyone clearly remembering or being allowed to discuss what actually happened. In this interpretation, not knowing the exact details is thematically appropriate. Fazbear Entertainment buries the truth, rewrites history, and leaves only vague references to incidents that might threaten their business. The bite of 87 is real. Someone was hurt. Policy changed. But the specifics are lost to cover-ups and time. We know enough to fear it, not enough to fully understand it, which keeps us off balance and prevents us from fully grasping the scope of the company's negligence. Or maybe we're overthinking a throwaway line from the first game that took on outsized importance as the series expanded. Maybe Scott mentioned the bite of 87 as world-building flavor, never intending it to be a major mystery, and now he's stuck with fans demanding answers to a question he never planned to fully address. The more games release without clarification, the more the bite becomes a monument to mysteries that resist solution, a piece of lore too embedded to ignore, but too ambiguous to definitively solve. Whatever the truth, the bite of 87 remains frustratingly incomplete in our understanding. We know it happened. We know when. We think we know where. But the who and which and exactly how remain disputed, debated, and ultimately unconfirmed. It's the bite that started it all, the first major mystery Phone Guy dropped in our laps. And years later, we still don't have complete answers, just theories, suspicions, and the knowledge that somewhere in 1987, an animatronic's jaws closed on human flesh. And Fazbear Entertainment has been running from the consequences ever since. Midnight Motorist and other lingering enigmas. Some FNaF mysteries are complex, sprawling questions about identity and timeline. Others are compact, self-contained puzzles that seem like they should be simple to solve, but remain stubbornly opaque. The Midnight Motorist minigame from Pizzeria Simulator is the perfect example. A short, pixelated sequence that spawned countless theories, each seemingly plausible, none definitively proven. And it's not alone. The franchise is littered with these smaller mysteries, ambiguous details, and unexplained elements that might be crucial or might be red herrings, but either way, they refuse to yield clear answers. Let's start with Midnight Motorist. This minigame, accessible under specific conditions in FNaF 6, shows a simple scene. You control a character driving a purple car, presumably heading home. The character is referred to as Orange Guy due to their sprite color, and when they arrive at a house in the rain, we see a small domestic drama unfold. One character inside, possibly the mother or older son, warns Orange Guy that he will be furious if he comes in. Orange Guy goes around to check on someone's room, finds it empty with a window broken from the outside, footprints leading toward a mysterious building in the distance. He pounds on another door, demanding to know what he did, and the scene ends. The mystery. Who is Orange Guy? Whose house is this? Who broke out? Where did they go? And what does any of this mean? The most popular interpretation identifies Orange Guy as William Afton. Despite the color discrepancy, William is usually purple in minigames. Under this reading, the house would be the Afton family home. The character inside warning him away could be Mrs. Afton or Michael. The empty room might belong to either Michael or the crying child, though which one and when this occurs is hotly debated among theorists. Some theorists place this after the bite of 83, suggesting the crying child spirit breaking out of his room and running to Freddy's, possibly where his spirit is possessing Golden Freddy, or being lured by something supernatural. The mound of dirt seen earlier in the minigame could represent where the crying child is buried, connecting this to his death. The mysterious building in the distance might be Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, or possibly the underground bunker where William conducted his nightmare experiments. Others argue this depicts Michael, showing his rebellious youth, sneaking out to Freddy's against his father's wishes, possibly before the bite of 83 even occurred. Under this interpretation, the person warning William could be Mrs. Afton, and Michael's window escape could be typical teenage rebellion, not supernatural activity. The building in the distance would simply be Freddy's, where Michael hangs out despite or because of his father's connection to it. Yet another interpretation suggests Orange Guy isn't William at all, but someone else entirely, and this scene depicts something unrelated to the Aftons that we're misidentifying due to assumptions. The purple car and the sequence's timing in FNaF 6 could be deliberate misdirection. What makes Midnight Motorist so frustrating is that it feels important. It's hidden behind specific conditions. It's presented as a secret to unlock. The cryptic nature suggests coded information, but the imagery is so ambiguous that you can construct multiple narratives around it, all seemingly plausible, none confirmable. Is the mound a grave? Is it just a pile of dirt? Are the footprints leading to or from the building? Why is William orange instead of purple? What happened at that place that orange guy mentions being turned away from earlier? Scott Cawthon has never clarified any of this. The minigame stands as a perfect encapsulation of FNaF's approach to lore. Give you a scene, let you interpret it, never confirm whether you're right. And it's not alone in this category. The security puppet minigame from FNaF 6 seems straightforward. It shows Charlie locked outside, William arriving and killing her, the puppet crawling out to find her and dying in the rain. But small details remain unexplained. How did Charlie get locked out? Was it an accident or deliberate? Why didn't the adults inside notice? The minigame establishes the first murder clearly, but leaves the circumstances maddeningly vague. The Fruity Maze minigame shows Susie, one of the missing children, being lured by William with the promise of her dead dog being alive. But the glitchy, corrupted visuals and the strange imagery around it suggest something deeper that's never explained. Is this Susie's memory of being lured, or is it symbolic? What do the various maze elements represent? Why this specific presentation? From Help Wanted and Security Breach, we have the Princess Quest arcade games, seemingly showing Vanessa Charshaw Vanny's struggle against Glitchtrap represented through fantasy imagery. A princess fights a glitch entity, frees herself from control. But the exact meaning of each game sequence, the identity of various characters represented symbolically, and the outcome of the final game remain debated. Does completing Princess Quest 3 actually free Vanessa? Or is that just one possible interpretation? The Night Terrors from FNaF 4 raise questions that have never been fully addressed. We know the crying child is having nightmares, possibly induced by William's fear experiments. But are these pure nightmares, or do they represent something real? Is the player actually the crying child, or are we playing as someone else experiencing these dreams? The debate between whether FNaF 4's nightmare sequences are literal nightmares or symbolic representations of something else continues without resolution. The shadow animatronics, which we discussed earlier, connect to broader questions about dark remnant, agony, and what exactly happens to extreme negative emotions in the FNaF universe. The Fazbear Frights introduce concepts like Eleanor, an agony entity that feeds on suffering, and the Stitch Wraith, a being composed of multiple souls and remnant fragments. How much of this applies to the games? Are the concepts meant to explain game mysteries, or are they separate continuity world building? Then there's the question of Mrs. Afton. In a series that obsessively details family connections, tragedies, and legacies, William Afton's wife is conspicuously absent. We know he had a wife. 3 children confirm that, but we never learn her name, never see her clearly in any minigame, never get explanation for what happened to her. Did she die? Did she leave William? Is she alive somewhere, aware of what her husband did? Her absence feels deliberate, like a mystery being preserved. But for what purpose? The survival logbook itself, beyond the name puzzles we discussed, contains countless small mysteries. Faded text and altered text communicate in ways we think we understand, but some exchanges don't fit clear interpretations. Some images in the book seem significant, but don't connect to anything we recognize. The book is a puzzle box where we've solved a few puzzles, but suspect others remain hidden. Sister Location's Exotic Butters is either a funny Easter egg or a crucial piece of lore depending on who you ask. Finding it ends your night early, but why? What does it represent? Is it a metaphor for Michael's attempts to escape his situation? A reference to something in his past? Or literally just a joke? The game doesn't say. The blackbird from Tales from the Pizzaplex, an entity that attaches to people experiencing guilt and slowly consumes them, seems thematically relevant to FNaF, but its exact connection to game events is unclear. Is it a metaphor for how guilt works in the FNaF universe? Or is there literally a blackbird entity somewhere affecting characters? Each of these mysteries, and dozens more like them, exists in a state of partial understanding. We have theories, often good theories with supporting evidence, but we lack confirmation. They're the loose threads in a FNaF's narrative, the details that don't quite fit, or the questions that seem answerable but somehow aren't. Perhaps this is intentional, a philosophy of leaving gaps for interpretation and community engagement. Scott Cawthon has always treated the fan base as part of the storytelling process, with theorists like MatPat effectively co-creating the narrative through their interpretations. In this framework, mysteries like Midnight Motorist aren't meant to have definitive answers. They're meant to generate discussion, to let different players construct different understandings of events, all equally valid within the evidence's ambiguity. Or perhaps some of these are loose ends from story revisions, elements that once had clear purposes, but became obsolete as the narrative evolved. Midnight Motorist might have made perfect sense in Scott's original plan for FNaF 6, but as sister location and other games altered the timeline, its meaning became muddied. Rather than retcon it or clarify it, he left it as is, letting the community interpret it however they see fit. What's certain is that FNaF will always have these lingering enigmas. The franchise is too complex, too intentionally cryptic, too built on community interpretation to ever achieve complete clarity. Every answer raises new questions. Every game adds new mysteries while solving, at best, a fraction of old ones. The result is a lore landscape filled with understood fundamentals and disputed details, where we know the broad strokes but argue endlessly about the specifics. These unsolved elements, from Midnight Motorist to Mrs. Afton to dark Remnant mechanics, form the texture of FNaF's world. They're what keep theorists engaged, what drive hours of analysis, what make every new release exciting, because maybe, just maybe, this will be the entry that finally explains the orange guy, or reveals Mrs. Afton's fate, or clarifies what the blackbird represents. And if it doesn't, well, that's fine too. The search continues, the debates rage on, and FNaF remains a series defined as much by its mysteries as by its horror. Conclusion: the beauty of unanswered questions. We've travelled through the darkest corners of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, examined mysteries both fundamental and obscure, and found ourselves in a peculiar place. Despite a decade of games, books, and intense community investigation, despite Scott Cawthon's willingness to engage with theorists and Steel Wool's expansive new entries, the Five Nights at Freddy's universe remains stubbornly mysterious. We don't know who possesses Golden Freddy for certain. We don't know what's in the FNaF 4 box. We can't definitively name the crying child, or explain the shadow animatronics, or confirm which animatronic committed the bite of 87. And perhaps that's exactly as it should be. There's something fitting about a horror franchise built on hidden truths and corporate cover-ups, maintaining its own secrets. Fazbear Entertainment buries evidence, rewrites history, and leaves crucial details ambiguous. The series itself does the same to us, presenting evidence without confirmation, hints without answers, leaving us to dig through metaphorical ruins looking for truth. We're Phone Guy asking questions we're not supposed to ask, Night Guards investigating what we're not supposed to know, and theorists trying to expose what was meant to stay hidden. Some mysteries will likely never be solved. Scott has admitted he's forgotten what was in the box. He's moved on from plot threads that once seemed crucial. The story has evolved beyond its original conception, making early mysteries incompatible with later revelations. And honestly, solving every mystery might diminish what makes FNaF special. The ambiguity creates space for interpretation, for community, for that uniquely engaged relationship between creator and audience, where meaning is negotiated rather than dictated. Not every mystery needs an answer to have value. The FNaF 4 box represents childhood innocence lost, family tragedy, secrets too painful to confront. Whatever you need it to represent in your understanding of the story, Golden Freddy can be Cassidy alone, or Cassidy and the crying child together, or something else entirely depending on which interpretation resonates with you. The Bite of 87 serves its narrative purpose, change company policy, and establish danger, without us needing to know exactly which tooth on which animatronic did the biting. What matters most is what these mysteries make us do. Think, question, discuss, engage. A fully explained story can be consumed passively. A mystery demands active participation. Every player who boots up FNaF 4, wondering about that locked box, every theorist analyzing Midnight Motorist frame by frame, every fan debating Gregory's true nature is participating in collaborative storytelling. Taking the fragments Scott and Steel Wool provided and constructing meaning from them. The unsolved mysteries of Five Nights at Freddy's aren't failures of the narrative. They're features, not bugs. They're what keep the story alive years after individual games release. They're what make returning to old entries worthwhile, because you might notice something new, connect something differently. They're what make the community vibrant and engaged, rather than passive consumers. And they remind us that not everything can be solved by looking hard enough. Some secrets stay buried, some questions go unanswered, some mysteries outlive their creator's ability to solve them. In a franchise about children's souls trapped in mechanical bodies, about crimes covered up by corporate greed, about horrors hidden beneath family entertainment. Perhaps it's thematically perfect that so much remains hidden, questioned, and unknowable. So while we may never know for certain what happened to Glamrock Bonnie, or whether Gregory is human, or what William Afton whispered to the crying child about putting him back together, or any number of other questions we've explored tonight, we can appreciate the journey these mysteries take us on. We can theorize and debate and analyze. We can hope that future games provide clarity while secretly enjoying the ambiguity when they don't. The doors to Freddy Fazbear's Pizza may be closed, the lights dimmed, the animatronics silent in their waiting, but the mysteries endure, the questions persist, and somewhere in the darkness secrets remain, waiting to be discovered or forever remaining just beyond our grasp, exactly as they were always meant to be. If you enjoyed this exploration of FNaF's unsolved mysteries, let me know in the comments which mystery fascinates you most, or which one you think might actually get solved someday. Feel free to like and subscribe if you want more deep dives into Five Nights at Freddy's lore, whether it's solved mysteries, current theories, or future speculation. And as always, thanks for listening. Whether you stayed awake through all of this, or let these mysteries guide you gently into sleep. Either way, the questions will still be here when you wake up, waiting as patiently as the animatronics themselves. Good night, and don't let the unanswered questions haunt your dreams, or do. Sometimes the best mysteries are the ones that linger. The nature of Remnant and agony. Mechanics. Still unexplained. One of the most fundamental mysteries in Five Nights at Freddy's isn't about a specific character or event, but about the very mechanics that make the horror possible. How exactly do souls possess animatronics? What is Remnant, really? How does agony work as a force? These questions touch on the franchise's supernatural physics, the rules that govern how spirits interact with machinery, and how emotions can imprint themselves on objects. And despite being crucial to understanding nearly every major event in the series, these mechanics remain frustratingly vague and inconsistent. Remnant first appeared explicitly in Sister Location's blueprint screens, showing schematics for the scooper with notes about injecting Remnant into animatronics. The Fazbear Fright stories expanded on this, describing Remnant as molten haunted metal, essentially melted animatronic parts that still contain the soul energy of possessing spirits. When this melted metal is injected into new animatronics, it transfers the possession, allowing spirits to move between bodies or be split across multiple vessels. This seems straightforward until you start asking specific questions. How hot does metal need to be to create Remnant? The stories suggest extreme heat, but also that Remnant is destroyed by fire, creating a contradictory relationship between heat and spiritual preservation. Can any possessed metal become Remnant when melted, or does it require specific conditions? If Remnant can be split and distributed, does that fragment the original soul, or does each piece contain the whole consciousness? When the Funtime animatronics contain Remnant from the missing children, are they simultaneously possessed by those children and their original programming, or does Remnant override existing AI? The concept gets more complicated when we consider possession itself. Charlie possesses the puppet without any Remnant injection, her spirit simply entering the animatronic after her death. The missing children possess the classic animatronics similarly, stuffed into suits and becoming bound to them through what seems like proximity and emotional connection, rather than any mechanical process. So if possession can happen naturally through death and emotional trauma, what purpose does Remnant serve? Is it a way to move already existing possessions, or can you create artificial possessions through Remnant alone? William Afton's experiments with Remnant suggest he believed it could grant immortality. By studying how children's spirits bound to machinery, he apparently hoped to achieve the same for himself. This implies Remnant isn't just about possession in the ghostly sense, but about preserving consciousness and life force in a transferable form. Yet his actual immortality seems to come from being spring-locked and naturally possessing the suit, not from Remnant injection. So did his experiments work? Or did he achieve his goal accidentally through the very death he was trying to avoid? Then there's agony, a concept introduced more explicitly in Fazbear Frights, but hinted at in the games. Agony is described as intense negative emotion that can imprint itself on objects and locations, creating entities or phenomena separate from traditional ghost possession. Shadow Bonnie in Special Delivery appears when you collect too much dark remnant, suggesting agony has a physical or measurable presence. The Stitch Wraith collects agony-infected objects. Eleanor feeds on accumulated suffering. But how does agony relate to Remnant? Are they the same thing? Different aspects of the same phenomenon? Completely separate supernatural forces? Dark Remnant specifically suggests a corrupted or negative version of regular Remnant, but the games never explain this distinction. Can happy emotions create light Remnant? Or is all Remnant inherently tied to trauma and death, because only violent emotions are strong enough to imprint on physical matter? The shadow animatronics themselves might be pure agony entities, manifestations of accumulated suffering rather than individual ghosts. This would explain why they appear across multiple locations and time periods, why they have reality warping properties like Shadow Bonnie's game-crashing ability, and why they seem to exist on a different level than regular possessed animatronics. But if shadows are agony, what created them? The Springlock failures, the missing children's deaths, years of accumulated fear and pain in Freddy's locations, all of the above. Help Wanted introduced the concept of scanning circuit boards, suggesting remnant or possession can transfer into digital space. Glitchtrap exists as a digital entity, scanned from old animatronics parts into VR games. This raises profound questions about the nature of souls in FNaF. If consciousness can be digitized, are these still ghosts in any traditional sense, or have they become something else entirely? Can digital remnant affect the physical world, or does it require a physical vessel to manifest fully? When Vanessa becomes corrupted by Glitchtrap, is that possession in the same way a child possesses an animatronic? Or is it more like mental influence from a malware-style entity? The relationship between remnant, consciousness, and physical form becomes even more complex when you consider Golden Freddy. This entity can teleport, crash games, exist in multiple places simultaneously, and manifest without a physical body. If Golden Freddy is possessed by Remnant like other animatronics, why does it behave so differently? Does having two souls, if we accept the Golden Duo theory, create unstable Remnant that gives it unique properties? Or is Golden Freddy something else entirely, perhaps an agony manifestation that only resembles a possessed animatronic? The novels introduce concepts like emotional energy and the idea that strong feelings literally reshape reality in small ways. A child's fear of monsters under the bed can make those monsters real through sheer emotional force. If this applies to the games, it suggests Remnant and agony might be two aspects of how emotions interact with the physical world. Remnant being the product when emotions bind to metal through death. Agony being the ambient accumulation of feelings that can manifest independently. But then we have the question of intent and awareness. When William creates Remnant by melting possessed animatronics, does he know what he's doing, or is he working through trial and error? Do the spirits trapped in Remnant retain awareness, or are they reduced to pure energy? When Baby contains Elizabeth's spirit plus injected Remnant from the missing children, is Elizabeth aware of these other presences? Can souls trapped as Remnant communicate with each other, or are they isolated fragments of consciousness? The destruction of Remnant adds another layer of mystery. Fire can destroy it, as evidenced by Henry's plan in Pizzeria Simulator to free souls through extreme heat. But Remnant is created through heat in the first place, so there must be a specific temperature threshold. Too cold, and souls remain bound to intact metal. Right temperature, and they can be melted into Remnant for transfer. Too hot, and they're released entirely. But what are the actual numbers? What temperature melts metal enough to create Remnant, but doesn't release the soul? And how did Henry determine the correct temperature for his furnace to free everyone? Security breach further complicates things by suggesting the Mimic's code can spread like a virus, infecting systems and possibly animatronics. If Glitchtrap is the Mimic's digital presence rather than William's spirit, does that mean no Remnant is involved at all? Can pure AI achieve the same reality-affecting presence as Remnant-based possession? Or has the Mimic created its own form of artificial Remnant through learning to mimic possession itself? The wet floor bots in the Pizzaplex present another puzzle. When Cassie deactivates them in Ruin, the game tracks collected caution bot souls, suggesting these simple cleaning robots are possessed. How did this happen? Were they intentionally injected with Remnant, or did they absorb it from the environment? Can any object in a sufficiently haunted location eventually develop possession? Or do mechanical objects specifically attract spiritual energy? If simple bots can be possessed, why don't chairs, walls, and prize plushies also develop ghosts? Perhaps the most fundamental question is whether there are consistent rules at all. FNaF has evolved across multiple authors: Scott Cawthon's original vision, Andrea Wagner and others writing tales from the Pizzaplex, and Steel Wool developing the modern games. Each iteration seems to introduce new mechanics or slightly different interpretations of existing ones. Maybe Remnant works differently in different contexts because it's being written by different people with different understandings of the franchise's supernatural physics. Or maybe the inconsistency is intentional, a reflection of characters within the story not understanding what they're dealing with. Williams' Remnant experiments could be fundamentally flawed, based on incomplete understanding of how possession works. Henry's furnace might release some souls but not others, for reasons he didn't fully grasp. The mimic's ability to exist both physically and digitally might represent a new evolution of consciousness in machinery that nobody, in-universe or out, has fully figured out yet. What we're left with is a supernatural system we can describe in broad strokes, but not in specifics. Souls can possess objects, particularly mechanical ones. This possession can be concentrated through heat into Remnant, which can transfer between vessels. Extreme emotions create agony that can manifest as entities or corrupt existing presences. Digital scanning can transfer these elements into virtual space. Fire can release trapped souls if applied correctly. But the precise mechanics, the rules that govern what works and what doesn't, the underlying physics of how emotion becomes matter and consciousness binds to metal, all of this remains speculation built on incomplete information. And this ambiguity affects every major question in FNaF. We can't definitively solve Golden Freddy's possession because we don't know if two souls in one suit would merge, fragment, or remain distinct. We can't fully understand William's motivations because we don't know if his Remnant experiments were scientifically sound or delusional grasping at impossible immortality. We can't explain the shadow animatronics without knowing whether agony entities are even possible, or if we're misinterpreting natural possession phenomena. The mechanics of Remnant and agony aren't just background world building. They're the foundation every other mystery rests on. And that foundation, despite years of games and books exploring it, remains frustratingly unclear, built from suggestive hints and contradictory details rather than solid, explicable rules. Perhaps future games will clarify. Perhaps Scott and Steel Wool prefer the ambiguity. But for now, the very forces that make Five Nights at Freddy's supernatural horror possible remain as mysterious as the ghosts themselves. The missing pieces, Mrs. Afton, and other absent characters. In a franchise obsessed with family tragedy, one figure's absence stands out as particularly conspicuous. Mrs. Afton, William's wife and mother to Michael, Elizabeth, and the crying child. We know she existed. 3 children confirm it. But beyond that biological necessity, she's a ghost in the narrative, mentioned obliquely if at all, never named, never clearly depicted, never given a role in the unfolding tragedy. This absence feels deliberate, a hole in the story shaped like a person, and it raises questions about what Scott Cawthon is withholding or what he's trying to say through silence. Think about what we know about the Afton family's tragedies. The crying child dies in the bite of 83, his head crushed in Fredbear's jaws during a birthday party that turned into his wake. Elizabeth dies shortly after, or possibly before depending on timeline interpretation, claimed by Circus Baby's stomach claw, in an animatronic designed by her own father, specifically to murder children. Michael survives to adulthood, but becomes a walking corpse after being scooped and possessed by Ennard, spending decades as an undead avenger hunting his father's legacy. William himself becomes Springtrap, then Scraptrap, then Burntrap, perpetually dying, but never allowed to rest. These are massive family catastrophes. 2 children dead, 1 transformed into something not quite alive, the father a serial killer turned immortal monster. Where is the mother through all of this? When the crying child dies, is she at the hospital? When Elizabeth disappears, does she search? When Michael stumbles home purple and rotting, does she notice? When William begins his murders, does she suspect? Or is she already gone by the time these tragedies unfold, making her absence part of the reason the family falls apart so completely? The FNaF 4 house, where the crying child lives with Michael, and presumably William, never clearly shows a mother figure. Whoever shouts at the crying child to get away from the TV could be interpreted as maternal, but is never confirmed. The family dinner table has empty chairs, which some theorists read as symbolic of the mother's absence, though this requires reading symbolism into what might just be standard minigame assets. Midnight Motorist potentially features Mrs. Afton as the character who warns Orange Guy away, saying he'll be furious if he comes in. This reading would place her as someone still present, trying to manage William's temper and protect one of their children from his anger. But as we discussed, Midnight Motorist is so ambiguous that we can't even confirm Orange Guy's William, let alone identify other characters in the scene. The novels feature a different Mrs. Afton entirely. In the Silver Eyes continuity, William's wife is briefly mentioned as having died, leaving William to raise the children alone. But the novels exist in their own timeline, separate from the games, so information from them can't be directly applied without confirmation from game sources. The novels might inform our understanding of patterns and themes, but they don't answer game-specific questions definitively. Some theorists propose that Mrs. Afton died before the main events of the franchise, possibly before the crying child's death, making William's descent into murder partially motivated by grief. This would create a parallel with Henry Emily, who also experiences family tragedy with Charlie's death. Both fathers losing important family members, one responding by trying to make amends and free trapped souls, the other spiraling into using death and possession for his own twisted purposes. Other interpretations suggest she left William, unable to handle his increasingly erratic behavior, or perhaps discovering his crimes and fleeing with or without the children. This reading would make her absence a choice, a survival instinct, though it doesn't explain why she's never referenced directly, why no character mentions her leaving or searching for her children. There's also the possibility, darker and more speculative, that William killed her, not for experimental purposes like his later victims, but in a moment of rage or to cover up something she discovered. This would make her the first victim of Afton's violence, a murder before the missing children incident, buried both literally and narratively so deep that nobody in the games ever references it. It's the kind of horrifying family secret that would explain the complete silence around her character. Or perhaps her absence is simply a narrative choice with no in-universe explanation. Scott needed the Afton family to function as a tragedy, and including an active mother character would have complicated the storylines in ways he wanted to avoid. Michael's journey works better as a solitary quest for redemption. William's evil reads as more complete when he's alone in it, not having to explain himself to a spouse. The household of boys in FNaF 4 creates specific dynamics that would shift with a maternal presence. But even if her absence is simply functional for storytelling purposes, it creates questions within the narrative itself. Families don't just have absent mothers without anyone noticing or mentioning it. Even if she died or left before the game's events, you'd expect some reference. A grave, a mention in dialogue, Michael thinking about her, something. The complete silence feels like it should mean something, like an answer waiting to be discovered rather than a question never intended to be asked. Mrs. Afton isn't the only conspicuously absent figure in FNaF's cast, though she's the most obvious. Henry, Emily's wife, is similarly unnamed and unexplained. We know Charlie had parents. Henry made the security puppet specifically to watch over his daughter. But where was Charlie's mother when she was locked outside in the rain? Did Henry raise Charlie alone? Was there a Mrs. Emily who simply isn't mentioned because she's not relevant to the plot? This pattern of absent mothers could be thematic. FNaF is very much about fathers and their children, the legacies passed down, the attempts to protect or control or redeem or continue through the next generation. William's children become his victims and his enemies. Henry's child becomes his motivation for everything he does later. The crying child's fate drives Michael's actions. Fatherhood, in all its forms from protective to destructive, is central to the franchise's emotional core. Perhaps mothers are absent because Scott is specifically exploring paternal relationships and their failures. Or perhaps there's actual lore significance we're missing. Maybe Mrs. Afton will be revealed in a future game as having known more than we realized, as having tried to stop William and paid for it, as having protected one child at the expense of another. Maybe her absence is a mystery meant to be solved eventually, a piece of the puzzle held back for the right moment of revelation. What we're left with is an absence that feels significant but remains unexplained. In a franchise where every detail seems to potentially matter, where the color of a car in a minigame can spark months of theorizing, the complete lack of information about Mrs. Afton stands out as either a massive oversight or a deliberate mystery. And given Scott Cawthon's attention to detail elsewhere, oversight seems unlikely. So we're left wondering, when did she die or leave? How did the family continue without her? Did William's crimes begin before or after her absence? Would the Afton children's fates have been different if she'd been present? These questions might never have answers. Mrs. Afton might remain perpetually off-screen, her absence more presence than any appearance could provide, a reminder that even in a franchise dedicated to revealing secrets, some information stays hidden in the shadows where not even the most dedicated theorists can reach.